Another heat wave and another round of wildfires. In the coastal town of Omiš in Croatia, a fire that started in one of the town's suburbs spread rapidly overnight. Flames engulfed buildings and injured dozens of people. Hundreds of others were forced to flee as the blaze inched towards the town centre, threatening cars and homes.
We are all in shock, that's it. There are really no words for this.
Around 1,000 residents and tourists sought shelter in a sports hall.
Of course, we don't expect that. It was horrible for us. Our host tell us we must evacuate here, and we take our car and we ride here.
There were similar scenes in Britain, where firefighters grappled with multiple wildfires across the West Midlands. A blaze in the town of Stourbridge affected 6 properties and left people suffering from the effects of heat and smoke. A child and 3 firefighters were taken to hospital.
Yeah, I went out with a hose pipe trying to damp the fence down, but it didn't make any difference. It was just so quick, and it was 10 foot, 12 foot high. It was way above me. I tried to stay there as long as I could, but it overpowered me in the end, so I had to come in.
As Europe swelters through its 5th heat wave, wildfires have also broken out in northern France's usually rainy Brittany, and in Greece, where over 300 people evacuated seaside towns and holiday villages in the northern region of Halkidiki. Temperatures are expected to drop over the weekend, but the scars of Europe's summer of wildfires will remain and raise more questions about the future, as climate change becomes impossible to ignore.
Joining me now is Professor Stefan Doerr. He's director of the Center for Wildlife Research at Swansea University. His work looks at global wildfire patterns and ways to adapt to the increasing threat of fires. Professor, it's good to have you with us. So we have got fires burning from the UK all the way to Greece. How serious is Europe's wildfire crisis right now, and is any relief in sight?
Well, obviously the crisis is very serious. We usually have wildfires in the Mediterranean because the summer drought is part of that normal climate, but to have simultaneous fires across western and central parts of Europe is really a problem at the moment. We've seen earlier the scenes in the UK, for example. We have an unprecedented fire season due to a very, very long drought, which covers most of Western Europe. So it's a very serious situation.
Your research focuses on soils and water retention. How can Europe, which is such a water-rich region, how can it become so dry?
Well, the answer is simple. If you just look at the river levels in some of the main rivers in Europe, they are below reported level in the long history. So we just haven't had the sufficient rainfall. And this, as you said, it's dried out the soil extremely, and that also supports the vegetation to become so dry that a small ignition can immediately turn into a relatively severe wildfire. Whereas if the soils would hold more moisture, the vegetation would be greener, and a potential ignition, perhaps agricultural machinery or a match or anything else, really a spark from a vehicle, would then not actually ignite a fire. So it is very much linked to that very low moisture content in the soil and the vegetation.
This low moisture content, I mean, this drying out, has it been rather sudden, or have scientists been able to see it coming for quite some time?
You can certainly see that coming weeks ahead, basically, because once we reach relatively low level of precipitation and also high temperatures and low air humidity, that does dry out the vegetation relatively quickly. And we know that we can predict this with relatively good longer-term weather predictions. I don't think anyone would have really predicted with any confidence that the heat dome we have sitting over Western Europe persists for such an extremely long time. So this is, I wouldn't say necessarily unprecedented, but this is certainly something that I think many meteorologists were also surprised about.
And is that where we get the connection with the heat waves, the heat domes, and the drought? Is the fact that when it is hot for such a very long time, then the moisture that is in the ground and that is in plants, it is going to evaporate and disappear. I mean, is that the connection?
That's exactly the connection. And that means that vegetation that would normally not ignite easily can now ignite very rapidly. again, if you look at the reports that were on your program earlier, it's often the grasses that are so dry that they can basically carry a fire very quickly. And once the grasses are burning, they can then ignite other parts of vegetation. And usually once you have a grass fire, that actually travels more rapidly than any other type of vegetation fire across the landscape, and it can ignite properties, and it can ignite forests, shrubs, and so on. So it's extremely dangerous.
When it does rain again, will the soil that's already, dry, will it be able to absorb that water and that precipitation?
Well, that's a really important aspect as well, because the soil is so dry. In some areas, the soil can actually turn hydrophobic, so it doesn't really absorb water very well. Also, we have these desiccation cracks, so that means a lot of water will just disappear into the subsurface and not be available for plant growth. Some of the water will just rush over the surface and go into rivers and reservoirs, causing erosion. So after such a drought, the rainfall will not be used in the same way and not be available in the same way for the plants as it would normally be in a moderately in a more moderate year, essentially.
And are we running the danger now of going from one extreme to the other, going from drought and then all of a sudden we get a lot of rain and the soil can't soak it up, then we have floods?
Yeah, that is very likely. Whether that's going to happen this year and where it's going to happen, if it does, I don't think that's something we can predict at the moment. But what is very, very clear is that these the extremity of these events and the frequency of those, whether that is drought, whether the heat waves, or whether it's extreme rainfall events, high intensity rainfall that leads to flooding, they are becoming more frequent. We're already seeing this, and the projections are that they'll be becoming worse.
I think people all around the world, particularly here in Europe as well, are looking at just the weather and then looking at the data and asking themselves, is the summer that we're experiencing now with this extreme heat, high fire risk, water shortages, is this going to become the new norm, or is it the new norm? Are these patterns that we're going to have to get used to here in Europe?
Yeah, I'm not that keen on the term the new norm. It may well not be the norm, but what will happen is that these conditions will become more frequent. Whether it's going to be such an extreme year in 1 year, 2 years, 3 or 5 years' time, I don't think nobody can or anyone can tell. But the fact that this become more likely to happen in the future is crystal clear.
And let me ask you before we run out of time, the forests, the land, can they regenerate, or will more frequent fires and drought, will they create lasting damage to Europe's ecosystems?
Well, if it's just the grasses burning, they come back very quickly. Conifers are often destroyed in fires. They may take 30, 40 years to recover. It really depends on the type of vegetation. I'm often surprised how well vegetation recovers, but we also have to remember that not all the vegetation in Europe is adapted to fire. So we can certainly see lasting damage in many areas, and that could not just be the plants, it could be erosion, for example. Water contamination and so on. So there are lots of effects from wildfires that go beyond the immediate destruction of vegetation.
Professor Stefan Doerr from the Center for Wildfire Research, we appreciate your time and your valuable insights. Thank you.
You're welcome.
I spoke about this earlier with Lindon Pronto, a senior fire management expert and co-founder of the Fire Climate Resilience Initiative. I asked him what this fire season in Europe has been like so far.
Well, this fire season for me has shown the limits of what our responders are capable of. It's shown us the limits of where our policies have not gone far enough, and exposed the weaknesses that we have in terms of being prepared for a future with more fire.
So there have been multiple fires. We've already mentioned a few in our show that are burning in Croatia, in Germany. We've also had fires in Southern Europe. We know that Europe is the fastest warming continent on Earth. What does this warming trend mean in terms of heightened risk of wildfires for Europe?
Well, it means that we are coming to grips with our past management decisions. It means that we must now act very quickly in order to become more resilient to fire. It means the engagement of individual citizens to do more to protect their own homes and property, because we are placing an impossible burden on first responders to expect them to be able to respond to fires which are exhibiting much more dangerous and extreme fire behavior. And finally, it means that we need our leaders, our elected leaders, to do more, to invest more in the places to make the conditions different so that we don't have these extreme scenarios to begin with. But that, of course, will take time. This is why action is very urgently needed.
Given that growing risk you're describing and the ample evidence of the human and material costs of wildfires, we know the kind of damage that fires can do. I was just wanting to ask you to tell us what can be done in concrete terms to address this problem and this challenge going forward.
Yeah, so we have different levels that we need to address this challenge on. On the one hand, we need the investments in the prevention, so not just purchasing more fire trucks and aircraft, but really investing in practices which make the landscape less vulnerable to extreme fire behavior. That means we cannot change the weather. We cannot turn back the dial on climate change. We cannot change the topography. We can change the type, arrangement, amount of burnable fuel in the landscape, because that is what is very much relevant right now in driving this extreme fire behavior. It means individual action to make our homes more fire hardened. We're seeing across many countries right now a new challenge that has been perhaps more familiar from other regions around the world, and that is the wildland-urban interface. So we're seeing right now towns being evacuated in Germany, fires coming all the way up to these settlements. So this is a completely different type of fire scenario that many countries are used to. And we need to invest to make sure that we do this, secure these communities and reduce the risk around them in the landscape. And of course, we need to also better prepare our responders. Many of these responders do not have specialized training in wildfire fighting. They do not have specialized training in the wildland-urban interface context or in proper mop-up extinguishing. These are all areas that need to be expanded upon. We need to also invest in our responders.
Okay, I just want to ask you about something you wrote on LinkedIn a couple of weeks ago. You wrote a post there suggesting that Europeans have become apathetic about the risks posed by wildfires. You said, we'd rather grab some popcorn and watch the world burn than change course. Just briefly, what did you mean by that?
Yeah, basically, we have been warning about this for decades. We have seen the writing on the wall, and we still are unfazed by it. We still accept a loss of life of first responders. We still accept the price tag of extremely expensive incidents, but we do not accept the price tag of investing in prevention, preparedness, and making the landscape more resilient. And that's where I feel like we've become apathetic to the reality that we're now facing.
Lindon, thank you very much for your insights. That was fire management expert Lindon Pronto.